In this lesson, we're going to be solving equations by using the zero factor property. We use this for equations that involve polynomial expressions that are of degree 2 or greater. In other words, they're not linear equations. It's not just a matter of getting x on one side and getting the number on the other. We have to employ some tricks. And the main thing we're going to be utilizing here is something called the zero factor property. And the zero factor property is fairly intuitive. It just says that if we have two things that are multiplied, for example, a times b, a and b are just some numbers. If this is true, then one of these numbers, a or b, has got to be zero. For example, if we have a number 5 that's multiplied by something and that equals zero, there's no other number that we can put in there other than zero that would make this true. 1/5 would make that 1. -5 would make it -25. It's got to be 0. 5 times something equals 0 means that the 5 has to be multiplied by 0. And the same thing with the b. So anytime you have two or more things that are multiplied to each other and they equal 0, one of them's got to be equal to 0. So we're going to use this idea to solve these equations. For example, the equation x squared plus 2x equals 3. We see that this is not a linear equation. In other words, I can't just get x alone on one side and a number on the other. It involves some factoring. So what we're going to have to do is set this up so we can use the zero factor property. That means two things. One is to get the 0 on the right-hand side. In other words, everything else goes to the left, and we're going to have a 0 on the right. So let's do that first here. So I'm going to get rid of this 3 by subtracting 3 from both sides of this equation. And I have x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. That's the first part. The second thing to do is to factor the left-hand side. So let's do that. On the left-hand side, we happen to have a simple trinomial. Simple doesn't mean, of course, that it's easy to do. It just means that the coefficient of the x squared term is 1. And so we factor by x here, x here, and then we just have to figure out what two numbers multiply to give us -3 and add up to give us 2. And those numbers are 3 and -1. Because 3 times -1 is -3, and 3 plus -1 is 2. So there's our factors. And now we have it set up so we can use the zero factor property. In other words, we now have a factor times a factor equals 0. And by the zero factor property, one of those factors has got to be equal to 0 for this to work, for this to be true. And so we take the first x plus 3. This has to equal to 0, that x has to equal -3. In other words, if x is -3, we can go back and we can plug that -3 into the x's. And in the first factor, we would get -3 plus 3, which is 0. 0 times whatever's in that other factor is going to give us 0. So that works. X equals -3 is a solution. And we can do the same thing with the other factor. X minus 1 is equal to 0. If that's true, in order to make that true, we solve that and we have x equals 1. And again, if we wanted to plug that back in, if x is 1 and we plug it into every place as an x, the second factor would say 1 minus 1, which is 0. 0 times whatever the other factor is going to give you 0. And so therefore, both of these numbers are solutions. Solutions means, of course, that these values make this true. So the bottom line for all of these equations that you're going to do in this section is to get these into a form that you can use the zero factor property, getting everything to the left, leaving just 0 on the right, and then factoring everything that's on the left and setting each of those factors equal to 0.